Joining me now is Gabe Lacques of USA Today Sports, who covers everything Major League Baseball. Ton of stuff I want to cover with you, Gabe. But first of all, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes to join me.
Yeah, not a problem. I appreciate it.
So you wrote a pretty extensive piece in USA Today that was something of a World Series recap with everything that the Houston Astros have been through and what they just accomplished, putting it in perspective. How should we feel, Gabe, about the Astros winning another World Series when 2017 is still seemingly so fresh in everybody's mind?
Yeah, it's the kind of thing people are never going to get over, and I think most of the Astros understand that. It's been a real exercise in restraint, I think, for them over the last 3 years in terms of all the booing they've gotten, all the poor, treatment that they've certainly earned from the sign-stealing scandal. But, we're now down to just 5 players on the roster who were around in 2017. So many fans are booing the institution when, in fact, so many of their players were not on the roster then, probably weren't even in the organization then. So it's all the while they've been able to maintain the standard of excellence. 6 consecutive ALCS appearances, 4 out of the last 6 World Series, and then they win this one. So, I think they went about it as good as they could from the standpoint of they pretty much put their head down and just continued to win. And I think, from ownership on down, they realize people are always going to be upset about 2017. And really, the only thing they can do is keep up this standard and continue to win with a revolving cast of players. And that's what they've done. And they're pretty well positioned to keep doing that.
Yeah, I love what you wrote. To kind of paraphrase it, that winning even really can't wash it away, but can be something of a deodorant. And I just wonder, for this handful of guys who were on that roster in 2017, do you imagine that this new championship is something of a vindication for them? Does it help them, wash a little bit of everything that they've been through away?
I think so, especially for a guy like Alex Bregman comes to mind. He was just 23 years old when they won the World Series in 2017. He was barely 25 years old when the scandal emerged. Really great young player, and nothing's really changed that. But he suddenly had to go from kind of a bright young star in this new generation of major league players to a guy that really was kind of looked down upon and scorned and considered a cheater. He had a great playoffs this past postseason, a really good year. He was healthy. I think, he's rather loath to admit it. He definitely kind of tap dances around questions, but I would think that it means an awful lot to him just because he's 28 years old now. He has a real legitimate World Series in his back pocket. So he's kind of the youngest and best of that group. Jose Altuve getting up there in years a little bit. Obviously he was well accomplished before 2017, so I'm sure it means a good bit to him too. But for Alex Bregman, a guy just entering his prime when all this broke, I think it's going to be a boon for him to be able to point to this and say, hey, I was a really key figure on a team that did it the right way, that won very legitimately.
As it relates to the series itself, Gabe, how fun to watch Phillies fans and Houston fans kind of go back and forth. And you had all these incredible isolated moments over the course of the series, but that combined no-hitter in the 4th game, was that the turning point in your mind?
It really was. That was a must win. It was interesting. You could kind of sense the mood from Dusty Baker, certain game days, definitely a little jumpy before game 4. A lot more relaxed going into game 5. And I think that has a lot to do with how game 4 went down. That, when you think about it, like, we'll look back on this series and it will feel like the Astros won relatively handily. They were down 2-1 on the road with Cristian Javier pitching that game. And, a lot of unknowns, but to them, they were very confident. To a man, they might believe that it's Cristian Javier and not Justin Verlander who's their best pitcher, just because he can be so dominant. So, and then you turn it over to that bullpen that put up the best earned run average in World Series history for a bullpen that pitched at least 45 innings. Just a remarkable touchstone. And a really entertaining World Series. I would say the best World Series since probably 2016, when you consider all the things that happened, the combined no-hitter, the Phillies really just kind of justifying their 87-win season. A lot of people were upset that they advanced in the playoffs. Really good team, obviously, and they put a big scare in the Astros. The Astros punched back and got back in the series and eventually won it. It's I think there's a lot of memorable stuff that went down in this series, and you're absolutely right that Game 4 was a crucial pivot point, and Cristian Javier just seized control of it for the Houston Astros.
And what an incredible introduction for Cristian Javier to just have this remarkable story, being from, the Dominican Republic, going undrafted, originally pegged as an outfielder in his teens. And then he shows up in the biggest moments, both in the regular season and in the postseason. I mean, if you didn't know his name before, you certainly know it now. Is he one of the more underrated, or has he been one of the more underrated players in Major League Baseball?
Absolutely, especially when you consider way back in June, he started a combined no-hitter, 7 shutout innings at Yankee Stadium. He and 2 other guys combined to shut the Yankees and Garrett Cole out and no-hit them. And you'd think that might have merited some attention, but he's just kind of there. And the Astros kind of keep him under wraps a little bit. He started Game 3 of the ALCS. He started Game 4 of the World Series. It's always going to be Justin Verlander and Framber Valdez coming out of the chute 1 and 2. So, Cristian Javier just kind of lurking there. But I think you'll see the progression. You'll see him ramp up a little more, be more of a full-time starting pitcher. He was mostly a starting pitcher this year, but still kind of was like, he's a little bit of a swing guy. Now he's probably the best arm that they have, and maybe the best testament to a really remarkable player development apparatus for the Astros. And so, that can really alleviate a lot of the blows that might come. Probably the biggest question mark for them, Justin Verlander, will he be back? And that yet remains to be seen, but at the same time, I think they could probably, take the blow of him departing just because of all these great young arms that they have, like Cristian Javier.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go next, because you have Verlander, who's 40. He got that sort of World Series win monkey off his back and had a pretty remarkable regular season coming back from surgery and everything. Where should Houston prioritize him in terms of retaining him? You mentioned some of this young talent that they have. If he got away, would that be the worst thing in the world for this ball club?
It's really interesting because he marked kind of the sea change of this franchise. They were building up. They tanked at first, and then they built back with young players. And then in August 2017, owner Jim Crane really wanted them to trade for him. And when he arrived, things really changed. They won the World Series that year. They maintained their greatness over the years. Can they win without him? They can, but how much does he mean to them in kind of a, in intrinsic or intangible kind of way? They can definitely win without him. Will he find greener pastures elsewhere? It's possible. When you get up to 40 years old, which he will be, I believe, in February, it's, you definitely look for the most guaranteed money possible. You look for a chance to win. There'll be a lot of teams willing to give him that chance. And when you look at the Astros history with Carlos Correa departing after last season, George Springer departing 2 years before that, and then kind of the trove of young pitching that they have, signs do kind of point to maybe it's time to move on. Maybe it's best that they don't allocate $25 to $30 million a year or more to Justin Verlander. Keep in mind, Max Scherzer kind of reset the market last winter with a short-term deal that was worth $43 million per season. That's definitely not an Astros type thing to do. And I imagine Verlander will be looking for that kind of commitment, along with Jacob deGrom and a few others who have seen kind of the new template for starting pitchers, which is shorter term deals for a ton of guaranteed money per year. And that might get a little too rich for the Astros blood. They could definitely use him. He's great for the culture there and would certainly add a lot to the rotation and ease some of the responsibilities on the younger guys. But when it gets down to it and the number of dollars that will be required to commit to him, you can kind of see that maybe he might find a little more somewhere else.
Which team immediately comes to mind for you for potential landing spots for him, just kind of off the top of your head, if it does turn out that he's too expensive?
Well, the back page of the New York Post a couple weeks back had a bunch of guys photoshopped into Yankee uniforms, from Justin Verlander to Carlos Correa to any number of guys. They'll definitely be in it. I would think. Basically, anybody who's a contender. And there's a lot of moving parts here. What if the Mets do lose Jacob deGrom? What if he finds a big commitment somewhere else? They could pair Verlander with Scherzer and give them similar contracts that wouldn't leave them on the hook for years and years and years of a commitment. They're always a possibility. The Dodgers are always a possibility. Maybe they realized that they could use another real horse in the rotation after a series of guys only went 5 innings in the postseason. That might not have been the best route for them. The Padres will certainly need to, they're never shy about spending money and going for it. So basically anybody that you see that was in kind of the upper half of baseball this year, and especially all the playoff teams, because if you lose in the playoffs, one of the first things you're inevitably going to look back on is we could have used more pitching. And so immediately your thoughts might turn to a Justin Verlander, especially when his performance is more predictive than that of, say, a really good relief pitcher. You know what you're getting with Verlander. The question is, are you going to be willing to pay for it?
It was so disappointing to watch the Mets kind of falter down the stretch in the postseason because you mentioned DeGrom, and I do want to ask you about maybe potential landing spots for him. But what do you think ultimately was the reason that they weren't able to deliver when so many fans and even analysts pegged them as a team that could go all the way? I mean, at one point in the season, a couple months before the postseason, we were really thinking about a Subway Series as a potential reality in the World Series. And the Mets, just what a disappointing exit.
Yeah, and it's interesting. October does funny things to teams. You think that a team is built for the World Series, and maybe it turns out they were built a little more for the 162-game grind, and that might have been the case with the Mets. Obviously, the Atlanta Braves ran them down. The Mets didn't blow the NL East. They got run down by the Braves, who just from Memorial Day on were absolutely unstoppable. There wasn't much more the Mets could have done other than win a couple of those games down in Atlanta at the end of the year. That knocks them into the wild card round. A couple of home runs from the Padres, and they're immediately on their heels in the wild card series. Yeah, it's tough to say what they need, just because I believed that they were going to be a really good fit in the playoffs when you have guys that can hit. You get to the playoffs, you need guys who can hit the ball out of the park and that can also hit elite pitching, and guys like Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, they can certainly fit that bill. And it just didn't happen for them. I think winning the division is so important because a 2 out of 3 is a real crapshoot, and the Padres come in and they win that pivotal game 3 with the little Joe Musgrove incident with the pine tar that didn't exist, apparently, whatever the case might have been. At that point, you are leaving yourself open to a funny bounce knocking you out, and that's basically what happens. So what do they need? It's a good question, but it has to start with starting pitching because they were able to piece it together with Max Scherzer and DeGrom on the shelf for good portions of the season, but when it gets down to it at the end, especially when you're trying to win a division from a team like the Atlanta Braves, you need those horses to kind of get you through that. And it will be very interesting to see how they handle DeGrom and what he'll be able to fetch on the open market, given his health problems the last couple of years.
If they are able to get somebody for him, I mean, if they got Verlander, like you mentioned a couple minutes ago, would that be enough of a salve, in your opinion, for what's been ailing them with starting pitching? And to that end, also, for DeGrom, you mentioned some of his injury issues. Where do you see him ultimately ending up?
Right. It's really curious because he did opt out of his contract, which makes sense because he's going to probably greatly enhance the average annual value of his salary. But is he going to get 5-6 years at this point, given his age and given his injury history? Seems a little bit unlikely. So, you expect something, in the 3-year range for about $40 million per year. And I think it's going to be a pretty wild off season from the standpoint of unpredictable teams coming out of the woodwork, because I think teams are finally realizing again that you need elite players to win championships. You need to get over that hump. And now that Major League Baseball has instituted a draft lottery, there's a little more incentive to try to win. You're not necessarily going to get a really great top pick if you lose a bunch of games. So the dynamics are going to shift a little bit. And I think that there's a lot of teams that are near contention, near getting over the top. A great team to look at is the San Francisco Giants. How will they spend their money? They've tried to kind of platoon their way to success. It worked one year, failed pretty badly this year, but they're sitting on a ton of payroll flexibility, and they're sitting on a fan base that needs to be ignited a little bit. They like their stars there. So they're going to be a really interesting player in all this, just to name one team. But I think there's a lot more like them. We may not realize at this point. Then you look up in January and you go, oh my gosh, they did that. So I think that's going to bode really well for the DeGroms of the world who, might be looked at as hired guns on a short-term deal to try to push a contending team along towards October success.
To that end, with teams that have some payroll flexibility and want to attract a little bit of star power, like at San Francisco, I can't think of a bigger star than Aaron Judge, the face of the league, who is coming off this remarkable regular season. You mentioned a short time ago that Justin Verlander is the kind of player that has intrinsic value to a team. And when you listen to Yankees fans around here over the course of the season, they were so excited to watch Aaron Judge chase history. Also, though, dismayed at the knowledge that they might be watching him in pinstripes for the last time, because they so clearly identified him with the values of what, makes a great Yankee. What ultimately do you think the future holds for Aaron Judge? Could he be heading out west? Has this soured with New York? What do you predict?
It's a really good question. And I think the conventional wisdom kind of holds in this case, which is to say Aaron Judge needs the Yankees and the Yankees need Aaron Judge. Not to say that Aaron Judge needs the Yankees for pure, money purposes. I think he's guaranteed himself a contract that will begin with a 3 and have about 8 zeros after it at least. So he's going to be in good shape. But, he is Aaron Judge, and he's a lot more interesting figure, a lot more marketable figure when he's wearing pinstripes as opposed to a Texas Rangers uniform or a San Francisco Giants uniform. And on the other side of the coin, what do you have if you're the Yankees if you don't have Aaron Judge? You have a TV network that's enjoying great ratings that needs that star power to continue those ratings, a stadium that needs to be filled. They really packed it in this year with Aaron Judge. Take him off the team, and suddenly who are you looking at to market in the absence of another big free agent acquisition? Are people going to show up every 5 days just to watch Garrett Cole pitch 6 innings? I don't think that's the case. I think they need that marquee guy to really keep that going. And he is really well built for Yankee Stadium. We make a lot of light of the right field porch there, but he does use it to his advantage, in addition to being able to obviously club the ball out of the park in a lot of other different places too. But it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. Will he want that extra, let's say if the San Francisco Giants come in with $40 million more, will he go for that, or will he, stay with what he knows and where, he may have the greatest footprint, the greatest maybe endorsement potential, all of those off-field things. I think he ultimately sticks with the Yankees, but there is a lot of money out there, as we mentioned, just lying in wait, in the coffers with a lot of big money teams ready to spend. At this point in time, I would say back to the Yankees. I think both teams can save a little face. He can get maybe $100 million more than the Yankees, $213 million they offered him way back in April. And the Yankees can say, great job, man. We love having you back. Here's what you deserve. And, everybody kind of goes home happy and they build around him. But long road ahead, and we'll see just how irrational teams get trying to lure a superstar of his caliber.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you outline it perfectly why the Yankees need him. I think some people have been saying once you are in the territory of having a salary with 3 and a bunch of zeros after it, as you say, I think that this will reveal maybe how he feels about New York and the way that he's been treated and how they've kind of classified his value up to this point. I mean, if he does decide to cut ties and head back out west for whatever it is, $40 million left or so, does that indicate to you that he really has been frustrated by the way that the Yankees kind of handled this from the start? I mean, there's so much in his favor to stay in pinstripes, like you say, from an endorsement standpoint. I mean, he, to me, is the face of Major League Baseball, particularly when he's in a Yankees uniform. That must really tell us something if he decides to go.
And I think it may, at this point, it might have more to do with the future of the Yankees and their viability as a contender. You get the sense there aren't too many hurt feelings from the way things went down. It happens every year. Teams try to reach an extension with a guy before opening day. Doesn't quite work out. They move on. More often than not, that player does leave. But, in this case, it is the Yankees, and they do have the money to pay him and the desire to. I think the bigger question for him will be, are we ready to win? This team ended the season with a lot of question marks. And again, the question of whether Hal Steinbrenner is ready to go full Steve Cohen and spend a ton of money and get over the top. He hasn't indicated that yet. He decided to go with a stopgap with Isaiah Kiner-Falefa at shortstop. The young shortstops they do have, Anthony Volpe most notably, sound encouraging, but it's a big question mark. It's very, very un-Yankee-like for them to kind of roll the dice, first on IKF and then upcoming on these young shortstops. So if they don't make a big commitment, if they're not interested in Carlos Correa or Trey Turner, and other teams are more willing to put together a real superstar kind of cast, will that have more appeal for Aaron Judge? Because it's going to get tougher for him if he is making $35 to $38 million a year and he's surrounded by not much. Anthony Rizzo has already opted out. How big are the Yankees willing to go to form a team around him? That might be the bigger question compared to, say, whatever hurt feelings might be left over from last April.
As we continue to look ahead to next season, Gabe, I always think about baseball as a sport that is steeped in tradition and has loyalists who really feel strongly about how the game should be played. And compromising the integrity of the game is always a really kind of touchy subject for those who care deeply about the sport and understand the nuances of the sport. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on some of the rule changes that we're going to see in 2023 with the bases being a little bit bigger and with pitchers being under the gun a little bit more to execute in a more timely fashion? What are your thoughts?
It's interesting because the two biggest rule changes, the ban on shifts and the pitch clock. One is kind of like giving some roses to the traditionalists. Hey, no more shifts. If you've watched baseball forever, you've kind of gotten tired of the second baseman standing near the right field fence to catch a line drive. The pitch clock obviously is going to create a lot of angst for those that love the game a certain way, but I think it's going to win a lot of converts. It's every young player I've talked to that's been in the minor leagues where they've been workshopping this. It's just effusive about the pitch clock, how great it is, how quickly the games go. I'm out of there in 2.5 hours. I think everybody loves that from fans to players to the media to whoever else. I think it's going to catch on quickly. You're going to see a lot of salty veterans, particularly relief pitchers, a Max Scherzer type. Maybe they get a violation called on them. Maybe they get a ball called on them. They're going to be mad. They'll probably make some very colorful quotes to the media that we'll gladly consume, but eventually people will get used to it, and I think it'll really enhance the quality of play. At one point during the World Series, you could time Framber Valdez between pitches, and he was up around 30 seconds. He'd take a little detour around the mound. He'd squat down behind the rubber. He'd rub his face, all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's good for his headspace, but it's really bad for people with a remote control in their hands or enjoying the game on a second screen or who have paid hundreds of dollars to go to the ballpark. There's a certain move it along element that the game definitely could use. And based on reports from what we've heard from guys down in the minor leagues and everything else, it has definitely enhanced the game. So I think April and I think spring training might be a little bit of a rough patch with people getting used to it. I would say by next June, it will feel pretty normal, and you'll see times of game go way down.
As you think about, Gabe, some of the bigger storylines that you're going to be seeing over the next couple of months, getting ready for next season, Shohei Ohtani, of course, is such a huge star as well. What are the chances that he could potentially be dealt this offseason?
Yeah, so GM Perry Manassian says he's not going to trade him, and you can probably believe that. I don't think the Angels could use that PR hit right now with just how bad things have gone for them. This national perception that they've wasted the careers of Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani by being unable to put together a playoff team. At this point, it's kind of like the greatest joy of being an Angel fan is going out to the yard and watching Shohei Ohtani perform. You take that away from them. I don't know if there's a Herschel Walker-like trade out there for them that could buff up the whole organization for Ohtani with just 1 year remaining. And the thing is, they're not too far away. They do need some pieces. They'll probably spend some more money. They will need some more pitchers to continue stepping forward. It's not like they're totally out of contention, especially with 2 wild cards. So that would be too big of a white flag to do right now. If Ohtani stays healthy and he's still very productive and the Angels are 20 games behind the Astros come next July, things could change greatly. But right now, I think that would just be too big of a hit on so many fronts for the Angels. You'll see him stick around, and for everybody's sake, hopefully he will stay healthy a third consecutive year and be able to put up these amazing two-way numbers that we've grown accustomed to.
And Elsewhere in free agency, just quickly before I let you go, I'm thinking about Carlos Correa, Xander Bogaerts, some of these guys that should be able to attract maximum value. Which names are you really going to be paying attention to in terms of potential landing spots that are game changers for wherever they might end up?
Well, it's really interesting, the three big shortstops. I know there's a few, but Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts, and Carlos Correa. The one thing I'm really curious about is the chances of them sticking with their teams they're with right now. Will the Dodgers commit 30 to 35 million to Trey Turner after paying big bucks to Freddie Freeman and Mookie Betts? Because Turner, Freeman, Betts, that's an amazing 1-2-3, and really I think is the backbone of a team that won 111 games this year. Are they willing to take on one more huge salary and bring Trey Turner back? That's a big question. You could see him, the Philadelphia Phillies, he'd be an amazing pickup for them. You could combine Trey Turner and Bryson Stott in the middle infield into that lineup. That would be really daunting, while also greatly improving the club's defense too. Will the Twins commit to Carlos Correa long-term after what he did for them this year? Really, they didn't make the playoffs, but obviously changed a lot of the mindset there. He really is one of those Pied Piper kind of players where you can kind of jump on his back and see where he goes. And then maybe the biggest question is Xander Bogaerts. Ever since the Red Sox won the World Series in 2018 and subsequently fired GM Dave Dombrowski in 2019, they've really tried to be efficient and sustainable and all this kind of stuff. And that's fine. That's one way to go about it. But, for the club that traded Mookie Betts, can they really afford to let Xander Bogaerts go? Are they willing to do what it takes to keep him? And he's been nothing but he's been in their organization. He's been in the big leagues for a decade now. I think he was on their 2013 World Series team and has been just a stalwart for them. And signed kind of a below market extension with an opt-out. And now, he gave them 3 years of that. And now he's a free agent again. Are they willing to commit to him to, kind of maintain that catalytic effect he has on them? If not, he's going to be on the market. And where does that leave the Red Sox? So those are cases where 3 free agents and the effect that they may have on the teams that are leaving is really huge. And that may kind of set the floor for where these guys might end up and what kind of salary they might get.
I remember how devastating it was for Red Sox fans to lose Mookie Betts. I mean, that just felt like a real punch in the gut for fans who loved him and to see him go. How much influence does the fan base ultimately have on what the Red Sox may or may not do as it relates to Xander Bogaerts? I mean, it's a business at the end of the day. It's all about the bottom line and values that these players can provide. Do you think that the organization is aware of the value he brings intrinsically, as you put it, and also out on the field? Will that sway them in any way to make sure that they do the right thing, for lack of a better phrase?
That's the $250 million question because attendance has suffered at Fenway Park. They're still, drawing, the capacity is 36,000. You're seeing more nights where they're getting just 30,000. The ticket revenue isn't quite as automatic as it once was. The demand maybe is softening just a little bit. Would Bogaerts restore some of that faith? It's possible. And it's such a big thing too. They traded Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts didn't leave as a free agent. They said, okay, you won a World Series with us 2 years ago. But we're not going to be willing to pay you to keep you around. We're going to trade you, and that's a pretty big wound for fans, and it might take some time to get over. And now it's a question of the Red Sox having to ask themselves, who are we? Are we the number 2? I guess number 3 behind the Dodgers, revenue team, spending team, all that kind of stuff. Do we want to chase down the Yankees? They finished in last place in the AL East, which is kind of amazing. Not that it was any bad thing. They were in contention. It was such a good division. But look at the Orioles, look at the Blue Jays, look at the Rays, look at the Yankees, what all they have, and in particular the Yankees' willingness to spend and where they're going in the future. Are the Red Sox going to pay to keep up with all of that, or are they just going to try to find little edges on the margins and all that kind of stuff? I don't think that's going to work anymore. I think they definitely need to go a little bit bigger, show a little bit of faith, and that starts with bringing Xander Bogaerts back.
Just bringing it back around to Houston, World Series champs again. as you assess the landscape, I mean, first of all, just what an incredible baseball season for fans to have just witnessed, with Albert Pujols going for a major milestone. And we all jumped on Aaron Judge and kind of watched that all happen with Roger Maris's record. And then you had this really entertaining playoff and World Series. I mean, it just seems start to finish like a very watchable, sort of fan-friendly baseball season with a lot of good stuff in it. Next season, do you expect it to deliver in the same way? And is Houston in a position right now to once again put themselves, at the top of the list for a potential repeat performance here? Who do you like heading into the offseason as we approach next year?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned how entertaining the season was, and it really was. It's wild to think that next year will be 2023, and it will be the first normal season since 2019, which is kind of amazing. 2020, 60-game COVID season. 2021, still a lot of attendance restrictions and a lot of COVID problems as vaccinations came online. And then this year, a 99-day lockout that pushed the regular season back a day and continued to sort of like imperil pitchers, with workload issues that started with the COVID years and all that. So it's kind of amazing that next year, clean slate, they're going to have the World Baseball Classic. There won't be a lockout. The season will start on time. So it should be an even better season from the standpoint of the game play and all that kind of stuff. I do like the Astros as kind of a favorite to repeat. I think they have so much depth and so many good young players that they could certainly run it back in the way that they have. The Dodgers, always a threat. They're bringing just about everybody back. It'll be interesting to see if they bring back Cody Bellinger for about $19 million a year in his final year of arbitration. A lot of questions for them after bowing out yet again in the division series. But it's kind of going to be the usual suspects. You're going to see the Dodgers. You're going to see the Astros. The Phillies, I think, are only emboldened to keep making big moves because the $750 million they've spent roughly since 2019 on 5 players paid off pretty well with a World Series title. So a lot of the usual suspects, and it's a little too early to say who the mystery clubs are going to be, but I truly think that they will exist this year just because teams have sat kind of in the weeds for a long time, and I think there's going to be a lot of teams willing to loosen the pocketbooks. That probably starts with San Francisco.